The 1960s was a time when things were very different. If you think about it, then it might be a miracle that any kid survived from the decade. Parents exposed their children to secondhand smoke, and general safety was not at the forefront. Some of the things that were considered normal back then would be frowned upon now. In this video, we will take a look at some of the 1960s things that would horrify people today. Not everyone smoked in the 1960s, but there was a sizable portion of the population that did. In fact, this was so much true that every car came with an ashtray and most had a cigarette lighter. People were able to smoke almost anywhere: work, home, grocery stores, and even while filling up with fuel at the gas station. Apparently, it was not flammable back then. Secondhand smoke was just something that everyone was going to be exposed to in the 1960s. Even if you were from a household that did not smoke, you probably still had an ashtray so that your guests could still light one up in your home while they were visiting. Since we are on the topic of smoking, let's explore that a little further. Women did not stop smoking just because they were expecting. It wasn't like they were trying to hurt their baby, but they just did not understand the damages that smoking could do. Another thing that you might see pregnant women doing was enjoying a little alcoholic beverage. Little did they know they were increasing the chance of having a baby born with fetal alcohol syndrome with each drink. Car safety in the 1960s wasn't anything that anyone thought about unless you were the car manufacturer. Certain cars had seat belts, but it wasn't until 1968 when it became mandatory for every new car built in the US to have them installed. Since there was no law requiring people to wear seat belts, most people did not, and some people even cut the seat belts right out of the car. They did not want these seat belts getting in the way. This was also a time period when kids would lay up on the back dash and take a nap. They did sell car seats for children, but they were very primitive and most people didn't even bother getting them. Kids either sat or stood up on the front seat so they could see over the dash. Mom's arm was the only seat belt you ever needed. The medical world is something that is constantly changing. In the 60s, moms were fearful of having a child with a flat head in the back because they laid them on their back. Pediatricians in the decade encouraged moms to let babies sleep on their stomachs, which is something we now know is not a great idea. These same pediatricians might have even recommended a certain brand of cigarettes to mothers because they were better. Childproofing a home in the 1960s was basically unheard of. Really, it just meant moving the ashtray out of reach from the baby or infant. No one wanted the ashes all over the place or burn holes on the couch or chair from the lit cigarette being dumped. When babies weren't in their crib, they were often placed in a playpen. But sooner or later, they figured out how to climb out. At that point, Mom would let the little one drag all the pots and pans out to play with while she cooked. And who cares about the poison underneath the sink? One thing that people did not do is put plug covers over the electrical outlets. That little baby was only going to stick something in there once, and then he was going to learn that that was a bad idea. Once kids learned the way to school, they were sent off on their way. First graders either rode the bus or walked to school. They might have tagged along with a sibling or with other kids, but parents did not worry about people lurking around. It was very much common for a kid to walk to and from school alone. In the 60s, there was no such thing as a playdate. All you had to do is yell out, "I'm going to Johnny's house, I'll be back later," and she would respond with, "Okay." So then you would take off on your bike and go over there for the whole day, and you might even eat dinner with them. It was very spontaneous, but it was perfectly normal. Cereal was something that every kid wanted in the 60s, and I'm not talking about something healthy. I'm talking about something that is pre-sweetened with sugar like Quisp or Quake. And if your mom kept a little sugar bowl on the table, then you would try and sneak a couple extra scoops in when she wasn't looking. These cereals may not have been the best, but kids loved them. Corporal punishment at school was certainly no joke. Catholic schools were known for having nuns that took discipline serious by slapping rulers across knuckles if you did something bad. But any school the kids went to could do things that would make mothers today extremely mad. It was not uncommon to pull a misbehaving kid out of a room by their ear or giving them swats with a board or belt. Not only would you face that at school in the 60s, but once your parents found out, you were going to get it again once you got home. Whatever the kid did, it was not something that the kid ever wanted to do again. The 1960s had plenty of toys for children to play with, and many of these are classics that kids still love today. But some of the toys that were around back then are a little bit on the dangerous side. The swing wing was an interesting one that was attached to a helmet. On top there was sort of an arm that you would try to rotate around by making a hula hoop motion. The faster you went, the faster it would swing around. Some of the kids that had this toy complained of having a whiplash-like pain in the neck as well as headaches. Regardless of whether or not it was a pain, this is one that you will not see anymore. Jarts or lawn darts were the ultimate toy in outdoor fun. The object of the game was to toss the heavy dart into the air and try to make it land inside of a hoop. The person with the most darts in the hoop wins. The problem with this toy is that many kids tossed them straight up above their heads and then made a mad scramble as this heavy missile came soaring back to Earth. Some kids had these darts pierce their body parts, including their head, which did not end well for some kids. BB guns were pretty popular for young boys to have, and really they were considered more of a toy than a weapon. It was not uncommon to see boys riding all over town on their bicycle with a BB gun on the handlebars and shooting at random objects. Today, BB guns are no longer seen as toys in retail stores. Kids in the 60s loved playing outside, and getting hurt was just part of the fun. Every mom had Band-Aids, but they also carried a dark red liquid that was a topical antiseptic to treat minor cuts and scrapes. This was known as mercurochrome, and kids did not mind it because it did not sting or irritate the skin. However, it did contain mercury, which is a heavy metal and is known to be toxic. Repeated exposure to mercury can lead to mercury poisoning, so it is safe to say that you will not find this for sale in your local pharmacy. Bottled water in the 1960s was completely unheard of. But one thing that they did have was the water hose. It could be yours, your friends, or your neighbors, and it did not matter. This was how kids and adults stayed hydrated during those hot summer days. Some of the hoses and nozzles that are on the market today may have some questionable materials that are used in the manufacturing process. That is the main reason why many people are no longer drinking from hoses. The 1960s had many people that enjoyed sunbathing, and they did not worry about UV protection. Your mom may have slathered you with suntan lotion, but that was to help you tan better and not to protect your skin from the harmful rays. Older kids would use baby oil with iodine in it to prevent burns, and some even used a reflector to increase the sun's rays. In the 60s, kids enjoyed playing outside all day long, and it was always unsupervised. It did not matter whether it was at the beach, in the woods, or in their neighborhood. For the most part, kids ran together in packs and nobody worried about the boogeyman. Once you were done with your chores, then off you went. It was always a full day of adventures, and these kids could randomly pop in at any kid's house to eat lunch or dinner. For the most part, it rotated, but every mom kept a little bit extra just in case of that unexpected visit. Hitchhiking became a popular mode of transport during the 1960s, and neither the hitchhiker or the driver ever thought much about it. This was not only done by adults, but also kids. Back then, everyone was giving it a thumbs up, and today, most people are giving it a thumbs down. The 1960s had very little safety equipment when it came to kids. When you did see it back then, it was a lot more primitive than what you see today. This was true for baseball, football, and hockey. But kids who were riding their bicycle never bothered with anything. For the most part, stuff like that wasn't even available. Kids rode their bikes without helmets, knee pads, elbow pads, or wrist guards. That was the norm back then, and for the most part, they just had to learn how to be safe on their own. If they got hurt, they needed to brush it off and keep going, unless it was serious, of course. Even though many things have changed since the 1960s, it was still a decade that many people enjoyed, and if given the opportunity, many people would love to go back to that time. Do you have any special memories from the decade? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.